Why don't you just go home?
I've been asking myself that one all night long.
So what happened? Why can't you?
I met this girl tonight, okay, in a coffee shop.
I feel like something incredible is really going to happen here.
So when I got home, I gave her a call. On the cab on the way down here, all my money flew out the window. I didn't really get along with her that well.
What's the matter?
I said, I want to see a plaster of Paris bagel and cream cheese paperweight. Now cough it up. So I left.
Hey guys, I'm Kevin,
I'm Jake.
and this is Movie Matters. Today we're talking about the 1985 Martin Scorsese film After Hours. It's a comedy, dark comedy, and kind of a thriller. It was, I'm pretty sure it was both our first time seeing it, right, Jake?
Yep.
Yeah, so, I had never really heard of this movie from Scorsese's filmography before.
Yeah, me either.
We started obviously researching 80s movies when we came up with this podcast, and this was on the list. And I don't know, it feels a little 70s to me. What do you think?
Yeah. It's like, 70s is a good way, I think, to categorize it. Like, it's, besides, like, the punks in, like, Club Berlin or whatever, there's not much that actually ties this movie to the 80s. And, like, yeah, everything's, like, slightly dated even for the 80s, I feel like, which is kind of weird. Yeah.
Especially with it coming out in 85, like right smack dab in the middle of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, like I said, it's a dark comedy. I was like blown away with how awesome this movie was shot. Like the camera work, the editing is so good. And like most comedy movies are just very simple and shot very simple, very plain. This movie was so awesome in terms of how it was shot. Like I loved that aspect of it. The movie was good. I didn't love the movie. I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. What'd you think?
Yeah, so I didn't know anything about it going in.
Same.
I didn't even know either that it's considered a comedy. I didn't find it particularly funny. Like, I mean, there's like a couple parts that were like a little, humorous, but like, to me, it read more like a surrealist art house kind of film. And like, there's a lot of elements that kind of made me feel that way. Like you said, the camera work is very, like it's not. It's almost thriller, shot like a thriller, where there's lots of like camera movement and lots of varying like depths of shots and like lengths of shots, and the acting is really interesting. Like a lot of the dialogue is very mundane, but the way it's delivered is just like slightly off-putting in a lot of ways. Like it's either like overacted or sometimes like underacted. And I think that's what makes me kind of think that it's like, it's not quite like a fever dream because everything's kind of plausible, but like, it's just very like, it's just, everything's just a touch out of place. And like, it's all very like weird and like, just like strange people and like strange occurrences. And like, it's like, it's almost like, after he meets Marcy, he like steps into another dimension that's like just next door. So it's like just a little bit different than like the normal world. But it's like
it's very interesting.
All not great for him.
Yeah. There's a lot to dissect with this movie. So I like how you said that, how he shot it with the, various depths of field and how it's just it feels very thrillerish, and it's shot like a thriller. So Scorsese designed this movie purposely to be almost a parody of Alfred Hitchcock's style of filmmaking.
Okay.
So his elaborate camera movements, I read that, it echoes sequences in Marnie from 1964. Howard Shore, who did the score, who's done a ton of soundtracks for Scorsese in the past. He did The Departed and a few other ones. But he wanted to evoke the same kind of style of Hitchcock's Bernard Herrmann scores for the movie. And I loved the score, just that kind of tense, It's like a clock ticking kind of it has some forward momentum, while also being slightly eerie and creates urgency in very, like I said, it's a lot of very mundane situations where this intense urgent kind of music is playing, so you feel like something's going to happen throughout the entire movie. And that's kind of I feel like this movie is almost just it's however long this movie is, hour and a half, I think. It's an hour and a half build up, and there really is no payoff moment, which is kind of interesting. I get that. I mean, I bought this movie on the 4K Criterion Collection, and I had the menu I just had the menu going while I was doing other things, and it was playing the music, and it was it kind of got in my head. It was really good. There's, and we'll get to the ending. It just, the way I think this movie is a comedy personally is, I mean, there's some funny parts, don't get me wrong. I laughed out loud at some parts. But like you said, it's not hysterical. Yeah. But it might be hysterical in the manic sense. Yeah. But there's, in my opinion, a great comedian, their first joke is also their last joke. It comes full circle. And I think this movie is very much that, where its first scene comes full circle to the ending scene, which I love that. That's whenever something does that, or whenever a comedian does that, or whenever a movie does that, it makes me like it even more. I love that style. I don't know. It's just, that's good writing, if you ask me.
Well, it ends up being a satisfactory resolution, even though you're back at square one. Yeah. But it for a movie that spends so much time in this just weird kind of place, to arrive back at normalcy is kind of extremely satisfying.
But yet it's tinged with that lunacy of him just covered in the the plaster, or the paper mache plaster, which is cool. And it's just all right, back to the mundane of life. But obviously we're getting into a bit of the ending. But I mean, it's super well directed. Griffin Dunne, the main character, we know him from An American Werewolf in London. He's the friend that gets mauled right in the beginning. So we another 80s 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon 80s. And obviously the cast is great. You got Rosanna Arquette, who's awesome in this. She's been in quite a few movies, really good movies. You've got what's his name, John Hurd, I believe is his name, who plays Kevin McAllister, who in Home Alone. And he's the dad. What's his? Kevin McAllister's the kid.
Is it Peter McAllister?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
He also is in The Sopranos as the detective that is depressed and throws himself off the bridge or whatever. And then you've got another Home Alone actress, Catherine O'Hara's in this. She's great in this. You got Terry Garr, who's really good. Verna Bloom. I mean, it's a great cast. It's just all the characters are so you're what? Why is this person gonna help out this guy, especially in New York, where like everyone minds their own business. It's interesting.
Yeah, well, there's a like Seinfeldian element to this where everyone
Is that a new
starts
term?
out. Yeah. But like,
I like
everyone starts out as like a very nice, helpful person, and then they just degrade into like being a total asshole. And,
Yeah.
like, that's kind of like the premise of like every Seinfeld episode ever. So like that's kind of what it reminded me of. But like, yeah, there's it always, every encounter that the main character has with any of these individuals, it starts out very like cordial and like yeah, like you said, like helpful and friendly, and then after some weird thing that happens, all of a sudden everyone's like kind of turns against him in one way or another, and like it all culminates in an angry mob chasing him. But
Yeah, it's funny you say like Seinfeldian. I like that. We've also related a lot of like. There's been a lot of like throwbacks or callbacks, which can't even call them a callback because Seinfeld came out before all these, or came out after all these movies we've seen. But like we relate it to Seinfeld a lot, I feel like, which is funny. Yeah, and then I like that, and yeah, the characters are pretty wild in this. Like, it's funny because it starts off with him meeting Marcy, who's Rosanna Arquette, and like he's like, oh, this girl's beautiful, and like I'm potentially. It's all hinges on the potential to get laid.
yes,
Which is funny because it's just like a horny guy in New York, and each scenario he like thinks he's gonna get laid, but it just gets worse and worse and worse. And there's a lot of like, it's almost anti-macho in this movie, and like,
yeah.
it's like like sexually de-escalating.
All of the women emasculate him.
Yes.
In one way or another.
Yes.
Yeah. And like it's very like by the end he like doesn't want anything to do with any of the women that he's meeting, like it starts with obviously Marcy, and then her roommate who's like aggressively sexual.
Yeah, he gives her a massage, which was interesting, and
yeah, and then she kind of well, their relationship kind of ends when she falls asleep in the middle of his story that he thinks is like a great story.
Yeah, I love that.
Which is pretty funny. And obviously, when he finally gets back with Marcy in the apartment, she repeatedly rejects his advances until he just leaves. Then there's the waitress at the bar who like kind of traps him in her apartment through like guilt. And like and then I think I'm missing one. Oh, the lady at the end who's in the bar alone.
we also got Catherine O'Hara.
Yeah, and Catherine O'Hara, that's right.
She
who's just
invites
kind
him.
of a nut job.
Yeah.
But like she kind of just like trolls him like for no reason, which is kind of weird, but it's all part of that like surrealism, that I kind of talked about, where like all of these individuals have these like very like just like I don't like, it's almost like mental illness in like all the different characters, but it like manifests in like very strange and different ways.
Yeah.
And kind of like they almost impart that onto is it Griffin, right? Is his name?
Paul in the movie, but Griffin Dunne is his
name
in real life.
Yeah, Paul kind of like just slowly kind of absorbs all of these people's like issues and like starts kind of manifesting them himself. It seems like throughout the movie.
Yeah, he's like a rat in a maze, and he's trapped in Soho in New York. And it's I love how it goes. You know, it starts in one place, goes to another, comes back to the other place. You know, a previous place, goes to a new place, goes back. Like there's just so much back and forth going to these places where it's just like, all right, I need to go here, then I go here, then I go here, but now I'm back here.
All the action seemingly takes place within like maybe 2 city blocks.
Yeah.
You know, and like, yeah, it's like this circular but also like non-linear kind of travel between these like 4 or 5 different locations, and I think that's super cool.
Agreed,
because it's a very good way to tell a like kind of mind-bending story like this. Without turning it into like a giant odyssey, you know, kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, especially in New York of all places, that's like massive and crazy. And it just, yeah, it's definitely cool how it literally just he's a rat in a maze. And it's, like you said, it's emasculating, especially when you see the mouse get caught in that trap at Terry Garr's character's house. And it's like he was going for a sexual advance, and then boom, he's cut off by this mouse getting caught in this trap, and he's that mouse in this whole trap, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think one of the other cool elements of this that you kind of talked about in the very beginning is the editing. I think it helps kind of reinforce all of these things that we've been talking about. I noticed a few different times there were cuts where there were like stark inconsistencies between image 1 and image 2, where like characters were talking to each other, which I thought was pretty interesting. And like they're I say stark, but like they're pretty subtle. Like, but like a lot of it were things like Paul and Marcy are sitting next to each other, and then in the next, like the camera, you know, changes angle, and they're like further apart than they were in the previous shot, and things like that. Like it was pretty interesting. I think, you know, like we talked about that kind of stuff in The Shining a little bit, where there's like slight inconsistencies or you know, like weird kind of stuff happening like with the editing and with the camera work, and it keeps you slightly off kilter, I think, and you might not register it, you know, like presently, but somewhere in your head, your brain's like something's not right, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Thelma, shout out to Thelma Schoonmaker, however you pronounce her name. She's been Scorsese's editor for a long time. She kills it. It like you said, it's very fever dreamish. It's nightmarish if you ask me.
Yeah.
And it's just nothing goes the way he wants it to. And it's just all he wants to do is go home, and it's like you can't because you're trapped. And I love that. You know, this movie I read, you know, it belongs in a grouping that revolves around a young working professional who's placed under threat, named the Yuppie Nightmare Cycle, a subgenre of films which combines 2 genres in itself, screwball comedy and film noir. Some critics present a psychoanalytical view of the sexual advances, Julie and Gail turning a vigilante mob on him, and June entrapping him in plaster, rendering him helpless. There are many references to castration in the film, most of which are shown when women are present. In the bathroom in the Terminal Bar, where Julie first encounters Paul, there's an image scrawled on the wall of a shark biting a man's penis off.
Yeah.
And Marcy makes a reference to her husband when they're in the diner in the beginning together, kind of on their date, where she uses a double entendre with her husband, saying, I broke the whole thing off, when talking about her and her husband's sex life. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the mousetrap, you know, clamping on that mouse right when Paul is sexually advancing. It's really interesting, especially like, I don't know, it's just like the pressures of life getting to him, and it's there's a lot to dissect with this movie, I feel like. And
yeah.
Yeah, I was excited to talk about it, especially when I didn't watch the movie yet, and you texted me, you're like, "Oh, I can't wait to talk about this movie." So that was cool. I mean, I watched it this morning, and yeah, I loved it. I mean, the original cut of this movie was 45 minutes longer, so I'm curious how that would have looked. But being an hour and 37 minutes, this movie flew by. I thought it was pretty entertaining.
Yeah, I think it is paced really well. There was one part for me that dragged a little bit, but overall, yeah, it's pretty urgent, like throughout all of the action, and like there's not really many points of like lull in the action. And like I said, like even like some of the mundane interactions that he has with people are like somewhat charged either by the score or like these like weird kind of dialogue deliveries or like, you know, like there's just it perpetuates that feeling of like uneasiness and like and surrealism, like just throughout everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, it keeps you engaged. Is probably the best way to sum that up.
And I love how I kind of mentioned this, where it's like, you know, it's that maze where he goes from one location to the next, but then goes back to the other location. I like how it all ties together. It's very cohesive. Like, you know, for example, the whole reason, even though it's not really the real reason, he's going to call up Kiki to see if he could get the date with Marcy, is to get this, what is it, like this paperweight, you know, bagel and cream cheese, like
Plaster,
what is it? Plaster,
yeah.
yeah. And I love how that ties into when he's at Terry Garr's place, and she's like, "I want to give you a present," and it's that piece.
Yeah.
And then, like, for example, another great connection is, you know, Marcy talks about her boyfriend and her husband. She's got all these different, like, love connections. And then, you know, she ends up killing herself. And we find Paul back at the bar with Tom, the bartender, who's John Hurd from Home Alone. And he gets that phone call and he's all depressed. And he's like, "Oh, my girlfriend, Marcy, just committed suicide." And that's like a whole nother thing. It's like, how in all these places, again, like in New York, this massive place, he has all these different connections that all like tie together, and they all like just keep escalating the worse and worse scenarios that keep happening to him.
Yeah.
And that makes it really entertaining for me.
Yeah, it's the like you said, that you're talking about a city of like 8 million people or something, and like these like 7 people are like inextricably linked.
Yeah, and he
this
can't
like
get away from
small like it's not even like the whole neighborhood of Soho. It's like 2 or 3 like square blocks within this neighborhood in New York, and like they're all just intertwined in this weird experience, I guess. Like it's really interesting, and like I think it helps add to that like maze element, that like no matter where he turns, he can't get out of this situation. And like, you know, he keeps saying like, "I just want to get home." And every time he goes to like, you know, get assistance, you know, that somebody else is tied into this like web of like bullshit that he has to deal with.
Yeah.
You know, so
yeah, it's wild. I read that it would have taken Paul about an hour and 47 minutes to walk home, assuming he walks at an average speed of 3 miles an hour, and you know, he hits the lights every, you know, at every cross street. Pretty interesting that someone like mapped that out, but also that would have been cool if the movie was 10 minutes longer, because it's an hour and 97 minutes. I mean, that's obviously with credits too, but if the movie was exactly that amount of time, where it would have taken him to get home, that would have been a little little cool if you ask me, but still pretty awesome. They so this movie originally was this. It was like a grad student's thesis, and Griffin Dunne and was it Amy Robinson, the producers, found this and decided to make this a movie. And Griffin obviously starred in it, wanted to star in it because it was a challenging role that he hadn't found before. And they originally had Tim Burton selected for a director to direct this movie, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And
I could see it though.
Yeah, definitely. But they initially really wanted Scorsese to direct it, but he was in the process of making The Last Temptation of Christ. But then that movie got canceled in the midst of production. And so, or it was production delays, excuse me, not they hadn't started yet. And Scorsese was so down and out, and that was his passion project, and he really wanted to make that movie. And they enlisted him to direct this movie, and he loved making this movie. I read, and I watched the behind the scenes, the making of on the Blu-ray, and he told Griffin Dunne and Amy Robinson, the producers, that thank you for making me fall in love with making movies again because of this movie, which is super cool. And if this movie didn't come out, or if he didn't make this movie, he probably wouldn't have continued making movies, which is pretty wild to think of, especially with the amazing movies he's made.
Especially since this movie came out, some of his most iconic movies, I think, come out after this. So,
yeah. What's your favorite Scorsese movie?
That's tough. I do really like The Departed a lot.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites too.
From
a more modern movie, I'd say that's one of my favorites.
I think Goodfellas is also just fantastic.
Goodfellas is great. Have you seen Cape Fear?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good movie, too.
I love that movie. That movie's so awesome. De Niro is just so unhinged in that movie.
Yeah. Casino's also a classic.
Casino is super good. Scorsese obviously is an iconic director. He told Griffin Dunne to refrain from sex and sleep during the movie in order to get a more realistic feeling of paranoia and annoyance from him, which is pretty cool. There are some weird parts in this, the whole burn victim thing, that. I feel like that was, I don't know, maybe it's just a fear of his because of that whole that story he tells to Kiki where he's I had my blindfold on and I don't want to see someone that's burned, and that's kind of ingrained in his childhood memory. I thought that was interesting. One part that I don't think was ever addressed, and it's a really kind of quick cut like you were mentioning earlier, is where he goes to Tom's apartment to get the keys, or for the register for the bar to get money for his train, and he flushes the toilet and the toilet just clogs, and it's there's no repercussions from that, which is ironic. I almost expected everything to have certain repercussions because of this movie, because again, there's certain things that come back from the beginning, or from a certain scene it comes back that he has to pay the price on. For example, the cab where his money flies out of the window, and then he finally sees that cab driver again. And, again, that relates to what we were talking about, where it's all these characters are so intertwined in such a small area, and the cab driver steals his 20. Again, I expected repercussions to be from the bathroom, but I didn't get it. And then I expected repercussions from when he goes to that diner and he's the guy who runs the diner's you have to be a paying customer in order to use our bathroom. And he orders a burger and a coffee. And then, he comes back later and he ends up getting that burger and a coffee, but he doesn't pay for it. I expected a little more repercussions from that.
Yeah.
But maybe it just wasn't as important, which I get. It just adds to the kind of comedy aspect of it.
Yeah, it's some of the details in the movie are really interesting, like the burn victim kind of thing. And like, you know, Marcy in particular is a really interesting character because she keeps giving him reasons to not follow through with sleeping with her, and he continually tries to push forward anyway. It seems like the burn like thing is what finally kind of like seals the deal for him, and he's like, all right, I'm out, you know.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, there's God, where to start with all the weird shit that she does. First she's not
There's
at the
a lot.
apartment when he shows up, even though she invited him.
Yeah.
When she gets there, she tells him to sit on the bed while she goes and takes a shower. So that's when I think he finds the like burn like cream or whatever,
yeah,
or in her bag. And then he's kind of just he's looking out the window and sees people having sex in like the building next door. Then she comes in the room and like yells at him for not being on the bed, which is weird.
Yeah.
Then she tells a story about how she was raped by her boyfriend, but she
very
slept
weird.
through most of it, which is like a weird,
creepy, and gross
and just like a strange thing
to tell a
to
stranger.
say. And like, it's also not clear if the boyfriend she's talking about is John Hurd or not.
Yeah.
So
that's what I thought.
That's kind of weird. Then she tells him about her husband that could only scream about the Wizard of Oz during sex, which is again like very strange. But also, I don't think she ever says that she got divorced. She just says, "I broke it off."
Yeah.
And
that she still loves him, and he lives in like Turkey or something.
But she's living in the apartment that he owns.
Yeah.
Which is so, yeah, like, then they get back, and that's when he finds the book with like all these like burn victim like pictures or whatever, like, which is weird that there's like a medical book like in her room. But
it's never really explained either.
It's not. And then the other interesting thing about his encounter with her is they smoke a joint, and Paul's like, "This isn't weed." And she's like, "Oh, well, that's what the guy told me, you know." And so like, I wonder if that's, it's Colombian. But I wonder if that's kind of one of the catalysts for things to like begin going downhill for him. Because like whatever that is, like, could have affected him, and that's why everything seems so strange, like moving forward throughout the movie. Yeah, I mean, it's Marcy's whole like narrative is just so bizarre.
Yeah, and then she like supposedly kills herself.
Yeah,
with pills, and I do think one of my all-time favorite shots of this movie is from Marcy. It's where she's like walking out of the bedroom, and the camera pushes really quick into her, and she winks.
Yeah,
and it's I literally was like, I watched this movie by myself, and I literally out loud was like, that was fucking sick. I don't know, I loved that shot. I thought it was awesome. Well, and it just was a very Scorsese shot.
Yeah, and up till that point, there isn't any other shot like that.
Not crazy like that, but I love all the tracking and the panning and everything.
Yeah,
like, it's so good.
Like that shot, I think, is what kind of launches into like the crazy shit, starting, a little bit. So, yeah, it's definitely really cool.
Yeah, agreed. I like, again, how it ties the paper mache, like art sculpture that these robbers are trying to get. That ties into the end too. I love that. And the robbers are Cheech and Chong, which is hilarious. that was like surprising to me.
Yeah.
That they were the robbers.
Well,
But
that like subplot is super interesting too, because the first time Paul sees them, they're trying to load the sculpture into their truck, and Paul knows that there's been burglaries in the area, so he's like, "Hey, that's not yours," and like chases after them. And they leave it in the street. He brings the sculpture back up to Kiki, and she's like, "Oh, those are just my friends." Like whatever.
And she's like gagged and like bound
to
like, which made no sense to me. That
Yeah.
she said like they're my friends. Like why would they tie her up? Maybe
yeah.
I don't know. That was interesting.
But then you find out that so from there you're led to believe that they're just some guys, that she knows that were buying a sculpture.
Yeah.
But it turns out that they are the burglars that have been hitting like every building in this neighborhood. So Paul was actually justified in chasing them off and early on. But yeah, that was also a funny kind of like circular thing that happens. And yeah, I mean, I think music too is used really well in this movie. And besides the score, but like actual like songs are used really well. Like in the bar, they play this like 60s kind of like slow rock and roll kind of like song type of thing that's kind of like it's out of place in the mid 80s, and like so is The Waitress. I can't remember what
beehive
her
hairdo.
Yeah, she's got like a 50s hairdo or like early 60s hairdo, and like she kind of acts like she's not like in the 80s either. Like it's kind of a weird out of place thing, and like that bar is almost like a island. Like it's like the only bar open at 2:00 in the morning, but it's dead.
Yeah.
Except for a couple slow dancing to this song. And later two like biker dudes are like making out at the bar, like next to
touching
Paul.
each other's nipples, dude.
Yeah.
That was
Like,
interesting.
Yeah.
It was so random.
Yeah. Like, but, I don't know. And then the other great use of music is in the waitress's apartment, where she plays the Monkees and then plays another song that
More
again
upbeat.
are like not in time with 1985. It's like a very weird kind of like it's almost like like it's removed from time.
Yeah.
Like all his interactions with her are like very out of place. And yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely very nightmarish.
Yeah. And the Catherine O'Hara scene is weird as fuck too. Like
In her apartment?
Yeah, like Paul's trying to call the operator to get a number of like his buddy or something that like lives in Soho to drive him home. And every time the operator gives him the number, Catherine O'Hara just starts yelling random numbers at him to like make him forget what the phone number is. And he's like, "Hey, like, what are you doing?" She's like, "I'm just trying to liven the mood." It's like, why are you being a dick? Like, it's like, and she does it like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah,
it's like,
she's a
strange.
very interesting character, and the fact that she drives a Mr. Softy truck and she just is like talking about it all the time, which is funny.
Yeah,
I don't know. There's a lot of funny parts. Like again, kind of, this is a movie where it's like when you finish it, you're just like, I have to digest this.
Yeah,
and when that happens, sometimes, I mean, it makes me like the movie even more.
Yeah, I think most times when I watch a movie that really makes you think, I come out appreciating it more and more as I kind of digest it, like you said. Yeah. Very, very seldom do I dislike a movie the more I think about it.
Yes, that doesn't happen often, but that happened with me recently. I went and saw The Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, and I thought it was garbage. And the more and more I thought about it, the worse I hated it. The more I hated it. It was really bad. And like, what's wild to me is it is continuing to get like praise and good reviews, and I'm just like, this movie was garbage. I mean, again, that's just my opinion, but it just makes me like, I've thought, I'm like, is this podcast making me hate new movies? Like watching all these cool ass 80s movies and like fun 80s movies, is it making me dislike all these new movies? I don't think so, because I think most new movies fucking suck, but most
have been for some time, but
yeah, I think COVID fucked a lot of things up, honestly. That's just me.
Yeah.
Not just in the movie cinema, but or in the movie theaters, but a lot of things. Yeah, that's a whole nother subject. Yeah, I mean, I really like this movie. It's a very underrated Scorsese film that, again, like, I didn't even know about. So I definitely think it should be on everyone's radar, and I think people should definitely watch it because it's pretty awesome.
yeah.
And I'm glad I bought it. Glad I
Same.
bought it in 4K. I mean, it looked awesome, and it was fun. I'll probably watch it again.
Yeah.
Not recently, or not soon, but I'll definitely watch it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a good movie. I love the ending and how it ties into the beginning, and yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend it, and I think everyone should watch it.
Yeah, agreed. It's definitely worth watching. I don't know if it was streaming anywhere because we both
on, like,
bought
Pluto
it
or something.
But
It's on some random streaming.
I'd recommend watching it highly if you haven't already. It's at least like very thought provoking and interesting.
Yeah, and it was a good change of pace from our, like, it felt like, to me, like one of the best shot and edited movies we've watched almost so far in our 80s movie collection so far that we've gone through.
Yeah, I
like,
agree with that.
Yeah, like, I just was blown away with how it was shot and how it was edited. The acting was awesome. Yeah, that's really what I came out with this movie. I was like, man, I hate to compare and contrast, but like comparing it to all the 80s movies we've watched thus far, it's like, it just felt different than all the ones we've watched, and I loved that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah. You thought this week was weird. Next week's going to be weirder because it's David Lynch, so...
Yeah. That's going to be... that episode could either be 12 minutes or like an hour and 12 minutes.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. All right, guys. We'll catch you later.